Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. We begin tonight in Quebec, where the coroner's inquiry examining Joyce Echoan's death has been becoming more complicated. Cross-examination of health workers is taking longer than expected, and the questions keep piling on. Lindsay Richardson was in Trois-Rivières.
Week 3 of the Echoan Commission, and healthcare workers are still filing into the Trois-Rivières courthouse to testify, except they're now flanked by privately hired bodyguards. Joliette Hospital's response to the recent death threats received from sources unknown.
The family is very exposed by this, of course. I mean, their life is being exposed publicly.
The Echoan family's lawyer says it's frustrating. They've also been threatened, but were not offered additional protection as the hearings continue.
So when the family sees, on the other hand, that there is a very impressive security dispositif on the personnel of the hospital and the protection of their identity and everything, it's obvious that they also feel that they should receive the same amount of protection in this context.
With the testimony of at least 10 healthcare workers now on record, Coroner Gehan Kamel's work is cut out for her. Since the beginning of the commission, she's made at least 14 requests for additional information to fill in gaps in their testimony. Here's what we know so far. Last week, the nurses at Joyce's bedside in late September denied the hospital's problems with racism and neglect. This week, we're hearing the opposite. On Tuesday, a nurse claimed she overheard Joyce's care staff saying, "Now that she's dead, we'll finally have peace." On Wednesday, another nurse claimed he went over his supervisor's head to get help for Joyce because she was being neglected. In his own words, "I bypassed to save a life." His supervisor, who testified just afterwards, denies it. Today, we heard from a chief nurse at Joliette, who says the racial remarks leveled at Joyce were unacceptable, but the cold approach used is typical in a crisis situation. "It's not okay, but sometimes we don't have the choice," she said. As a follow-up, someone asked what more could have been done to save Joyce's life. She couldn't answer the question. Next up to testify are pharmacists, pathologists, and toxicologists, no doubt to return to the point of Joyce's alleged narcotic and cannabis abuse and whether the combination of the two could have worsened her condition or possibly contributed to her death last September. We'll be following the story and we'll bring you a roundup of the week's events tomorrow. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Trois-Rivières, Quebec.
Ontario has released its action plan for addressing the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and its 231 calls for justice. It comes nearly 2 years after the final report was released. The province released 6 Pathways to Safety, a plan to preserve Indigenous lives in Canada. The Pathways' aim is to protect groups like Indigenous women, children, and other gendered people. Ontario will commit $1.6 billion to different sectors, including healthcare, justice, and culture. Cora Maguire-Charette, Executive Director of the Ontario Native Women's Association, says the plan is a move in the right direction.
Let's agree to work towards change. Let's agree to do something together. And when we shared our truths, and governments have respected it, and take those truths forward and begin looking at their systems and begin looking at the policies and the systemic change that we need to make, this is when we'll start to have safety.
Documents obtained by APTN through Access to Information reveal the toxic work environment at Indigenous Services in Halifax has been harming staff for years. Consultants hired last summer have called on Ottawa to acknowledge its role in allowing the issues to fester. Brett Forrester has that story.
Tucked away in this nondescript Halifax building is the Atlantic office of the First Nations and Inuit Health Branch. It's the wing of Indigenous Services Canada that provides health services to communities. And, according to this confidential internal report, it's also a dysfunctional work environment marred by broken trust, fear, and harm. While thoroughly redacted, its findings are grim. Department is seriously flawed, one employee said. Senior leaders in Ottawa have failed us. You are not the first ones to do this. There have been others. Ottawa has allowed this to fester. Continue to send folks. I am angry and upset. they have allowed this to happen. According to the consultants, one of the interviewees described the workplace as feeling like an ICU or an ER. Yet another said the Atlantic region was more of a crisis management organization, as opposed to one that takes the time to identify key priorities. Sharon Rutherham and Juliana Julian are health directors at nearby Migma First Nations. They say this toxic environment also harms communities.
There are severe gaps and many problems that have truly impacted our communities as well.
There's no way you can compile that kind of a report and not include the communities in that. There's no way that you can have an organization who's servicing First Nation communities and it be a toxic environment, but that not trickle down to our communities. There's no possible way.
The consultants directed significant blame toward this place, Health Branch HQ in Ottawa. They called on HQ to, if not apologize, at least acknowledge the harm. Indigenous Services declined an interview request for this story. Instead, the department sent us a copy of a new employee charter it hopes will heal the fractured office. A spokesperson said the department is reviewing the report's 7 recommendations and will implement them where appropriate. They didn't say if anyone had been fired or if anyone apologized. Brett Forster, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The organization representing First Nations in northern Manitoba will now be working with RCMP to help enforce pandemic bylaws to help stop the spread of COVID-19. Prior to this, leadership in communities were struggling with finding ways to support their bylaws. A number of communities have had to deal with outbreaks, with some having the military called in. With the new protocol, officers may investigate offenses and lay charges against the person who breaks the local COVID-19 bylaw that was enacted by Chief and Council. But MKO Grand Chief Garrison Satie says it's up to each First Nation to determine how they want the enforcements to work.
We're using this tool to combat COVID-19 for this particular time. It's by no means trying to take away the sovereignty nor disrespect the autonomy of each First Nation. It's a choice that will be left up to them. We're just providing a mechanism how they can enforce their bylaws if they chose to do so.
The Canadian press is reporting that a Migma First Nation in Nova Scotia is being forced to rejig their lobster harvest next week. Comes after the federal government threatened to confiscate traps that aren't approved by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Sabaganaganey Chief Mike Sachs said instead of pursuing a moderate livelihood fishery, a food, social, and ceremonial fishery would be pursued instead. This means there will be less traps per boat, but a portion of their catch would be allowed to recoup expenses. No word from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans yet. Hockey player Ethan Bear received racist messages following the Oilers' loss in the NHL playoffs. We'll have more on that after the break. Welcome back. Ethan Bear experienced racist and hateful remarks online after the Oilers' season ended. Now support is pouring in from across Turtle Island, with everyone from politicians to fellow athletes having one message: I stand with Ethan Bear. Here's Daryl Stranger with more.
Support for Ethan Bear has poured in from across Turtle Island. The Prime Minister, journalists, and fellow athletes all voiced their support for Bear online. Edmonton Oilers captain Connor McDavid took to social media denouncing the racist comments to Ethan. Quote, the individuals who spew this type of hate should think twice about their behavior. Ethan is such a positive role model for the Ochapowace First Nation and does so much amazing work in our local Edmonton community. On behalf of all my Oiler teammates, we stand strong behind Ethan and against racism of any kind. The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations is also speaking out in support of Ethan Bear. Vice Chief Heather Bear, who is Ethan's aunt, had this to say in a statement. Quote, my nephew is a strong man and a positive role model to so many people, but it hurts our community and our First Nations youth who read and see these comments online. No one deserves this disgusting backlash. The Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations in Alberta is another organization speaking out against the remarks directed towards Ethan.
Certainly something that's not needed in any circumstance, especially in sports. I think sports is where very important for a lot of our nations, where we try to get our youth to participate and get involved in activities in sports. And then when they see this type of things happening, we don't want to see it as a discouragement for them to pursue whatever they want to pursue. We will stand beside them if they are going through a situation like this. So it wasn't a no-brainer for us to step in and advocate.
A rally will be held on May 29th in support of Ethan Bear in Edmonton. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Many more goals ahead for that young man. Well, Fisher River Cree Nation in southern Manitoba has finally settled a land claim that was outstanding for almost 3 decades. With more on the details, here again is our Daryl Stranger.
Fisher River Cree Nation is located roughly 177 kilometers north of Winnipeg. Now, they have finally settled the land claim that's been on the books since 1994. Now, Canada set aside just over 2,900 acres in 1896 for agricultural purposes, but that was less than what was originally agreed upon between both parties. Now, with this claim settled, Fisher River will receive just over $15 million in compensation for the land. Now, Chief David Crate has not given APTN an interview, but in a news release, he said in part, "After this long history and the cooperative negotiations undertaken by both parties, the Chief and Council of Fisher River Cree Nation is hopeful that this resolution will be part of a long and prosperous relationship between the First Nation and the Government of Canada." Now, in the same release, Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett said that she hopes the settlement is a step towards reconciliation. Quote, "Settling long-standing specific claims through cooperative partnership is a key step towards rebuilding our nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples." Now, since April of 2020, there have been 36 specific claims settled with over $1.7 billion of compensation for those claims. Pasqua First Nation in Saskatchewan settled a 16,000-acre claim for roughly $9,000 an acre. Weway-Sikapo in Manitoba settled a claim for about $15,000 an acre. And Roseau River south of Winnipeg settled a claim for about $10,000 an acre. Now, Fisher River's average per acre is roughly about $5,000. Daryl Stranger, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Time now for another quick break, and then the story of a drive-in on a First Nation that's been at the center of controversy. Welcome back. A drive-in theater on an Alberta First Nation has caused some conflict regarding COVID-19. Alberta Health Services tried to shut it down after weeks of operation. The nation is keeping the drive-in open, but the question is being asked, do public health services have jurisdiction over Indigenous land when it comes to COVID protocols? Mayor Pimentel has that story.
On a cold, rainy day, a drive-in movie seems like a safe enough event during a pandemic. This one, held on the Tutenna Nation right next to Calgary, has a drive-up food truck and strict rules put in place. No one can leave their vehicles except to use the washroom. So last week, when Alberta Health Services said this drive-in didn't follow COVID-19 protocols, Chief Roy Whitney said the shows will play regardless.
We've been through this before, the pandemics within our communities, and we know best to manage our own people's health. We are elected here. We are an order of government.
Alberta Health Services has since changed that rule, and the drive-in is now allowed. In an email to APTN, Indigenous Services Canada said First Nations in Alberta are required to follow COVID-19 restrictions as determined by Alberta Health. Nations can, in some cases have, implemented public health measures that have exceeded the provincial recommendations. But Chief Whitney says in the future, the First Nation is educated enough to make its own decisions. Tutenna has its own health professionals hired with nation funds. And while the community will take advice and work with AHS, it has its own health act and protocols put in place. such as a curfew.
It allows Chief of Council to make choices that are safe choices, who we know best. So our health experts informed us that we were able to continue with the drive-in theater.
Since the drive-in is open to the public, it'll bring in extra funds. It's also being used for concerts and will hold graduations over the summer. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News on the Tutenna Nation.
Last winter, we met Riley the horse from Horse Sense Equine Guidance. We also learned about his owner, Mickey Colton, and how she's helping Indigenous women succeed in business. But after a long, inactive spring, Mickey has taken on a new opportunity, which makes Riley the star of a children's book. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
Remember when we did the stuff
In spite of business being slow, Mickey Colton enjoys spending time with their horses.
Give it a try again. We'll see how much you remember in your brain. You remember lots, don't you? Come on,
like many other businesses across the country, Colton's farm hasn't had any visitors for months. With so much downtime, Colton has taken up a new venture.
I took a course, and my mentor, Shira, said to me, "You tell stories all the time, and they're such good stories. I think you should share them. So why don't you write a book about your horses?" And I thought, okay, that actually didn't sound like a bad idea, so that's why I did it.
Her first children's book is all about Riley.
Riley's the horse I've had the longest, so he's been with me since he was 11. He just turned 27, so it was, and he's given me so much stuff over the years that was worth writing about. So that's why I chose that one incident to write about.
The book is called Riley and the Road Cones.
I went back to school after I retired from the military. I went to take my veterinary assistant course, and one of the lessons we had to do was to teach a pet a trick, so with a clicker. And so I decided that I would use him as my pet, you know, so to speak, pet. The teacher was very surprised when I turned in the video, of course, because she was expecting a cat or a dog, not a 1,200-pound horse. You know? So, all right, I'm going to move it here, Ross.
The book shows how smart and funny Riley is and how he learned so quickly to do this trick.
So smart.
The book is the first of a series of 4 stories, each one about a horse at the farm. Riley and the Road Cones can be purchased on Amazon. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Prince Edward County.
Good boy.
One smart horse. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News this weekend. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.